Hello, I'm Jonah, and this is Viewer Obsession Advised. For this episode, we're diving into another lost film. However, while On the Silver Globe was an epic, large-scale film with a troubled production led by a once-banished auteur, the film we're talking about today is absolutely nothing like that. Today's movie was actually finished on time, and it was shown at film festivals as planned. However, it didn't get a wide release because the audience that it was intended for didn't think it was all that good. Well, that, and there's also an incident with a fire, but we'll get into that in a bit. Put on your eclipse glasses because we're about to stare directly into the bizarre film that is Incubus. Leslie Stevens' Incubus is the 1966 film made by Leslie Stevens. It was filmed after the cancellation of Stevens' famous sci-fi television show, The Outer Limits, which was how he met William Shatner. Shatner, as you know, would go on to star in the hit science fiction television show, Stargate. Incubus was made by Stevens' production company, Daystar, which featured a crew that was normally working in television. And this film has often been cited as the Lost Outer Limits episode because of how similar it is to the plot, tone, and production quality. It's a movie that may not appeal to everyone, but it certainly appeals to me. Let me give you a quick peek behind the curtain here before we continue into the movie. For my last two attempts at the Viewer Obsession Advised episode, I had an angle for each of them that I was kind of going for here. Like, for instance, for On the Silver Globe, I was pitching the idea that the film was ripe for revival. For my Influx video on The Wicker Man, I wanted to show how a movie could flip genres, and I pinpointed the exact shot where The Wicker Man did this. But for Incubus, I don't necessarily have an angle. I just like this movie, and I think that someone else will probably enjoy watching it as well, even though it's kind of slow, a little boring, and very silly at times. So I guess my angle for this video is, why should anyone care about Incubus? I said at the top of the video that the movie did not perform well enough to be given a wide release, and that's partially true. On the one hand, the movie was very critically acclaimed. It had a lot of great buzz around it with these art house festivals. People really enjoyed it, and the foreign market especially really liked it. However, it didn't find its audience, and it was made for a specific audience, so we'll go into that in a little bit. But there was another issue as well. At the time, getting a low-budget movie into broad circulation at the theaters wasn't possible unless it was a drive-in film or an X-rated film. So Leslie Stevens and Tony Taylor, the movie's producer, even thought about shooting some scenes in Technicolor and adding a scene with nude women in order to make it more appealing to the late-night grindhouse crowd. But they soon dropped the idea and put the film on a shelf. The other reason why it didn't receive a wide release was because when Taylor attempted to revive the movie and distribute it direct-to-video, he discovered that the original copy of the film may have burned up in a fire. In any case, the people storing the film couldn't find it. Incubus was considered a lost film until about 30 years later, when they found a copy of Incubus at the Cinémathèque Française in Paris, France. There's going to be a lot of bad pronunciations of things, sorry in advance, where they'd been showing the movie for over 30 years to packed audiences. Tony Taylor was able to release the film direct-to-video, but after a short run on DVD, this weird little movie has faded from the hearts and minds of the greater public. I think Incubus would have faded into obscurity completely, if not for a few things. Number one, our boy Bill Shatner is in the movie, which for me is enough reason to watch it on its own. Number two, the movie has great atmosphere, including haunting music and beautiful cinematography that work hand in hand incredibly well. Number three, Incubus is the second film ever to be shot in the constructed language of Esperanto, which makes it historically significant. Oh, and number four, there might be a curse on the film or something. These are the primary reasons why I think someone may have an interest in watching this movie. So these are the sections I'm going to go over. Bill Shatner is already a household name, so I don't see a reason to talk about him in too much detail in this video. So let's just do an overview of the story first, and then we'll enter the atmosphere. That's not a space pun, I promise. So, what is the movie about? Well, the film, which interestingly enough predates the Satanic Panic era, is about a young succubus named Kaya and her aspirations to become the best demon of them all. A succubus, according to Merriam-Webster, is a demon assuming female form to have sexual intercourse with men in their sleep. If that definition isn't clear enough, Wikipedia.com defines a succubus as a demon or supernatural entity in folklore in female form that appears in dreams to seduce men, usually through sexual activity. Or, according to Urban Dictionary, a succubus is a sexy demon chick with wings, horns, in a gothic leather dominatrix getup, complete with 4-inch heels. So Kaya and her hellish order hang around a village that has a convenient gate to hell and, more importantly, a legendary water well. The deer well is rumored to have healing powers and can bestow everlasting youth. It's not true. It's just an ordinary saltwater well, but people come from all around in search of eternal youth. It is upon these people that Kaya preys. Although, by prey, I don't mean that Kaya rapes them in their sleep like the classic succubi myth. No, she just kind of flirts with them a bit and then drowns them in the ocean, as you do. Kaya is a young, bored, and ambitious demon who believes that her talents for luring people to their eternal demise is going to waste, since the people who come to drink from the well are already selfish and corrupted. They are too easy for her to tempt, and she wants to prove that she can tempt the most godly man there is. She believes that no one can resist her hypnotic flirtation. She looks around her area for a godly man, but even the priests in this area are corrupt. Kaya soon meets her match when Mark comes limping into her life. Mark is a selfless war hero, which the movie equates to purity or goodness or godliness or something, and therefore his soul will not be so easily condemned. Kaya is warned by her demon sister Mal that he's not going to be able to be taken down to hell. What follows is a battle between wills. Kaya tries to tempt Mark, and he refuses her advances. He attempts to show her goodness and love her, and she is repulsed by it. Kaya soon realizes that she is over her head with Mark. He is too good, and his goodness is affecting her and turning her toward God. The film then follows the pair as they fight, fall in love, struggle with their differences as a man and a she-demon, and once they finally get together, Kaya wrestles with the Incubus in the end, and as she crawls away in desperation, she finally succumbs to the goodness in Mark and becomes a spirit of light instead of darkness. And that's kind of it. I mean, there's a little more to it. There is an eclipse at one point, and at another point, the Incubus takes revenge on Mark by preying on his sister in sort of the traditional sense of the myth, but that's pretty secondary to what is essentially a melodramatic love plot. When it comes to the story, Incubus reminds me of shows like, obviously, The Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone, and the original Star Wars. These are shows that fall into a genre that I call family-friendly existential horror science fiction anthologies. I realize that this is kind of an oversimplification of these shows, but just go with it for now. The film's subject matter is a pseudo-philosophical exploration of good and evil, which would fit right into one of these two shows. But there is another commonality between the film and the shows as well, and I'm not just referring to the cast and crew. In many ways, all of these share the same struggles with pacing. Rod Serling, the creator of The Twilight Zone and one of my personal heroes, had said in an interview that he wished he could have maintained a higher level of quality with his show. When it came to his shoestring budget, he would spend almost everything on big episodes with big ideas, and then whatever was left he would put into cheap in-between episodes. In anime terms, we would call this filler. And filler isn't just an episode-sized issue. Filler is also found inside of the expensive episodes as well. If a story could be wrapped up too quickly, actors would be filmed walking around or messing with the set in order to fill up the whole episode's block. One of my favorite examples of filler in The Twilight Zone is in the episode called The Invaders, in which we watch a woman in her kitchen. The woman silently pretends to make soup as ominous music plays in the background. This part goes on for way too long. Just for fun, I'm going to let this entire sequence play in the corner over here so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here. Rod Serling actually talked about The Outer Limits by name, as well as Gene Roddenberry's show Starship Troopers, as having the same problems with consistency in quality. If a plot could be wrapped up too quickly, then we spend a lot of time walking around to fill up the whole block. The pacing of the story suffers as a result. And I think that's basically what you find with Incubus, which makes sense because it's a 1960s television guy's attempt at an art film. Incubus is not a long movie. It has a runtime of about 78 minutes, but it feels longer because we spend a notable amount of time just following people as they walk around. I think it's fair to say that most people don't watch Incubus for the story itself. However, I think it's also fair to say that people do watch it for the atmosphere. There are 3 big names associated with this movie. I've already mentioned Shatner and Stevens, but the third famous name is Conrad Hall, who was the lead cinematographer. Oh, hey, look, the invaders have finally arrived. That's great. Well, I'm going to release his footage now. It's going to go away, and let's get back into Incubus. Hall went on to win awards for his work on films like Road to Perdition and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. His cinematography in Incubus really stands out. His shot composition gives the movie a very spacious, dreamlike quality, as if the strange little village is a real place just outside of your imagination. It's a shame that we no longer have the original print of Incubus, because what we can see now of it is only a shadow of his original work. But it's not only about what you see, it's also about what you hear. So the trance-inducing music that you hear throughout the film was composed by Dominic Frontier, or Frontier. I'm going to go with Frontier, just because for some reason it seems a little more final. He was the composer for The Outer Limits, and people who are familiar with the show might recognize the music you hear in Incubus, because a majority of the Incubus score is actually found in The Outer Limits in some form or another. The score was produced in large part by John Caper Jr., the film's music editor, who remixed old music from The Outer Limits in order to produce the new soundtrack. And the cinematography and the music work really well together to give the film a strangely hypnotic viewing. I mean, I've watched this movie about 5 times, and each time I've watched it, I've fallen asleep. Hold on, let me rephrase that last statement, because I really like this movie, and I think people are going to assume by my saying that I've, fallen asleep with every viewing, that it's going to be like a slight against the film. Like, it's so boring, I've fallen asleep. And it's not necessarily that. What it is that the movie is so poetically rhythmic, and the music is so hypnotizingly ambient, that Incubus has lulled me to sleep every single time I've watched it. And I think that's actually a credit to the movie. It makes the viewing experience better for me, because every time I rewatch this movie, there are parts that I've slept through during prior views that I've never seen before. It's like I get to rediscover the movie over and over again. I don't know if that's, something you can put on the back of a box, but, it's a movie to fall asleep to. It's great. It seems like this film is an attempt by the Outer Limits director to make an Ingmar Bergman film. And I think Stevens and his team did a great job in capturing a very similar, surreal, visual poetry style that is exemplified in Bergman's work, even if the style in Incubus is kind of lacking Bergman's philosophical substance. But the atmosphere doesn't stop with the music and the visuals. The language the film was shot in plays a huge part.
Ili posadas povan qui detrui la cora, grandam povan, misteram profundon, preter ni compreno. Povan, tian povan. One nomas tian amo.
Esperanto is a language that was constructed by a doctor named Ludwig Zamenhof. Zamenhof was born to a language teacher mother and a linguist father. He grew up in Białystok in the 1860s, in a Russian-controlled region that is now part of Poland. I briefly covered this era of colonization of the Polish region in a prior video, but the long and short of it is, a lot of neighbors laid claim to Poland, and when they moved in, there was a lot of conflict between people groups. Zamenhof, who spoke a number of languages, believed that much of the hatred in the world could be solved by having a single, unifying language that has no cultural ties. He devised a language that could be easily learned by anyone, no matter their level of education. This language would bring harmony to people all over the world, because when everyone speaks the same language, there will not be the misunderstandings that now occur between different cultures. It's a very utopian idea, and it's one that I actually see a lot of merit in. I'd be tempted to learn Esperanto if I wasn't already struggling with English and Japanese. Watashi wa totemo isshoukensei benkyou shimasu. By the time we reach the 1960s, Esperanto has not become the worldwide language that Zamenhof had envisioned. But the language was being spoken. In fact, it was estimated that there were 2 million speakers of Esperanto when Incubus was in pre-production, which is also the estimated number of Esperanto speakers we have today. Esperanto has a very interesting sound. Because it is a combination of what Zamenhof considered to be the best parts of a bunch of different languages, like Latin and Hebrew, Esperanto sounds both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. So when you film an entire movie with the cast speaking Esperanto, it adds to the strangeness and surreal quality of the movie, which is what Leslie Stevens said was his reason for filming Incubus in Esperanto. He claimed that this was an artistic choice. There are others who disagree and said that putting the film in Esperanto was a marketing ploy instead of an artistic device. I am embarrassed to say that I own a copy of Shatner Rules. I'm even more embarrassed to say that I've read it from cover to cover. To say that I was influenced by the original Star Trek series is probably an understatement. My love for weird psychological horror stories can be traced back to the Enterprise's crew and their daring adventures. So when I found a copy of Shatner Rules on sale at a dollar store for a cool 99 cents, I just had to have it. It's a sort of mock autobiography, and I would consider it more to be a money grab than anything of actual value, but there are a couple interesting chapters in here, and one of them is about the movie we're talking about today. This book is actually how I first learned of Incubus, so I guess dollar well spent. In this book, Shatner claims that the original script for this movie was in English, and that the fact that it was going to be in Esperanto was a surprise to the cast. They didn't realize until they showed up to the production that this was going to be in a foreign language. In fact, 8 out of the 18 production days was spent relearning their lines so that the cast could perform the scenes in Esperanto. According to Stevens, this was an artistic choice. He felt that the way that the language sounds would make the film feel more atmospheric and spooky. According to Shatner, however, Stevens probably made this choice in order to market directly to Esperanto speakers, with the hope that the film would be more profitable. The Esperanto speakers who were supposed to buy into the movie, however, weren't interested. And I don't think it's just because Leslie Stevens pushed native Esperanto speakers out of the production process. Which he did, and because he did, it means that the movie now features poor Esperanto pronunciation by the cast, which I don't know anything about Esperanto. I don't know how it's supposed to sound, but apparently it's not very good. But I think the movie was unappealing to this audience because of just what the movie is. If I were to make a movie in Esperanto for Esperanto speakers, I would make a movie that specifically spoke to the reasons why they like the language. Why are they devoted to Esperanto in the first place? The movie would be about ideals or harmony or unifying people or building cross-cultural relationships. Why the hell would you make a surreal horror movie? You're marketing a movie to idealists and language enthusiasts. Why do they care about this sort of satanic storyline? It doesn't make any sense. Leslie Stevens was claiming that the language had sort of a creepy vibe, and that's the reason why he put it in the movie. But by saying that, you're telling this people group that their language is spooky, and that's not a great way to endear yourself to your target audience. If I were to guess, I think that the original script of the movie being in English suggests that the choice to make this an Esperanto film was sort of a secondary idea. It was more of an afterthought. Maybe Stevens lost confidence in the movie, and maybe he made this quick gamble in order to save his dying studio. Or maybe he really did plan on making this an Esperanto film from the beginning. And maybe he just hid it from his actors because he didn't want them to back out of the movie, before they actually got started. I don't know. Who knows? One thing is for sure, though. Incubus is the second film in Esperanto and only one of a handful of films ever made in the language. That fact alone makes it historically significant. It's just a shame that the movie wasn't also profitable. I'm a bit hesitant to talk about the alleged curse, but it is a big reason why someone might be interested in watching this movie. So we'll cover it real briefly. According to the back of the DVD box version of this movie, Incubus is a cursed film. In pop culture, cursed films are movies, usually horror movies, which have had either a series of unfortunate or presumably supernatural events occur on set, or they've had a series of tragedies after the film is wrapped, or maybe both. Poltergeist is probably one of the biggest ones that come to mind when we're talking about cursed films. There were about 4 untimely cast member deaths, which took place before or after filming, including most famously the focal child actress Heather O'Rourke. and she tragically died soon after the release of the film due to a misdiagnosed congenital intestinal abnormality. Now, I tend to believe that calling a film cursed is little more than a marketing gimmick, or at the very least, good old-fashioned superstition. But if there is such a thing as a cursed film, Incubus would have a pretty good shot at earning that badge. Ann Atmar, who played Shatner's on-screen sister, committed suicide a few weeks after the film wrapped production. After the production, Milos, the Hungarian actor who played the titular Incubus, was dating Barbara Ann Thompson Rooney, Mickey Rooney's estranged wife. His body was found with hers after he murdered her and committed suicide. A few weeks after the release of Incubus, the daughter of Eloise Hart, who played Amael, was kidnapped from her home in Las Vegas and murdered. Her body was discovered several weeks later in the Hollywood Hills. Perhaps the weakest evidence, although it's still worth mentioning, is that Leslie Stevens' production company Daystar went belly up after the release of this movie, and he also ended up getting divorced soon after as well. However, it seems as though his company was already financially suffering anyways, and the woman he divorced was Allison Ames, who was the actress for Kaya. Many articles mention his divorce as being a product of the film's alleged curse, but he and his wife got together with Incubus, so I think that's kind of just a moot point. Like, you got together with this movie, and so obviously you're going to get divorced after it if you're going to get divorced at all. It doesn't make sense why it would be considered part of a curse, but whatever. I'm a non-believer, I guess. Another interesting thing to mention is that director Roman Polanski and his date, actress Sharon Tate, were special guests of Incubus's premiere. Sharon Tate would, of course, be killed in the Manson family rampage in 1969, 3 years later. Years after the film's initial art house run, after Tony Taylor, the producer, could not get it sold, couldn't get the rights sold, he decided he wanted to revive the film with a video, because direct-to-home viewing seemed like a really good option for this movie. He contributed the fire to the Incubus curse, much like he did with some of his misfortune in his personal life. I'm not going to say that there is no such thing as a cursed film, but what I will say is that I think it's unlikely. I think when you get a group of people together, you get a group of problems together all at the same time. It's just how it happens. And don't get me wrong, I definitely think this movie is surrounded by tragedy, but in sort of a dark way. Maybe that's kind of to the movie's advantage. I think in a lot of ways, the tragedies are more interesting than the movie itself. I really like Incubus, not only because it's a unique watch, but also because I watched it when I was in college. You see, at the time, I was attending classes in which I was watching these huge films. I was watching The Godfather, or Casablanca, or The Seven Samurai, or Apocalypse Now, or Shawshank Redemption, or The Matrix. I was watching and writing about dozens of movies that I would consider to be the pillars of Western cinema. And as a student looking up to all these giants, I was incredibly daunted. I had started to believe that in order to be successful, I had to aspire to these huge, looming works. I started to believe that I had to be perfect in order for my work to matter. And then randomly, I saw Incubus on YouTube. Strangely, I felt a lot less tension watching Incubus than I did so many of the movies I had been studying in class at the time. Incubus was not a huge movie, with big effects or big names, with an ambitious plot or a bunch of unique locations. Incubus was a small film made by a small group of people. I thought it was very imperfect, and I loved it, in part because it was imperfect. It was one of the first times that I realized that it didn't matter whether my work is seen by one person or 100 people or 100,000 people. It doesn't matter if my work is perfect or flawed. Someone somewhere is going to enjoy it and maybe even be moved by it. And I think that's good enough reason for me to keep working. All right, that's all for now. Thank you for tuning in. Good night. And remember, Neragado lesunon, G. Blendigos fin.